a relatively impromptu fashion. However, we will have a wonderful speech on funny stories. Please welcome Tom Kramer.
Thank you, Mr. Postmaster. You're a very affable man. Nice to meet you. I'm doing a demonstration talk from the Speaking to Inform manual, and the reason I picked that is because we didn't have a speaker tonight, and rather than just have no one stand up here and give the speech, I said I would come up and talk off the top of my head. So, that's what I'm going to do. I just recently, where I live at the Ocean Jewels Resort on Beachside. The man who was the head of maintenance resigned under a lot of pressure from myself and a couple of other people. The person who was also there never showed up. We fired him. The person who was on the head of the board, I'm on the board of directors at my condo, and the head of the maintenance committee, he took over. He was the head of maintenance for a week until he had a stroke and ended up in the hospital. And so I have been the head of maintenance for the last couple of weeks. An interesting thing for me to be, since I'm not being paid for that position. I already have a full-time job, although where I work is where I live. As many of you know, I teach on the internet, so it allows me to stay home. Now, I've worked as a custodian a couple of times in my life. The first time was I worked at the Veterans Hospital in the early 70s. I was an undergraduate and I needed a job, and so I got a job working weekends. And I was at that age where you drank a lot. You know, I was 19, the age for drinking had dropped down to 18 back then. It was an experiment we had in this country for a little while, in the 1970s. So I would be getting stinking drunk Friday nights and Saturday nights because that was the age I was. And I would come into the hospital with red eyes and just horribly hungover. And rather than do my janitorial work, the nurses would put me on the examining table and give me aspirins and fluids and allow me to sleep the morning away until I felt good enough. So I didn't learn a lot from that job other than the kindness of strangers when you're young and stupid. It was not a bad thing to have. So from there, I didn't have another custodial job until after I got my PhD. I started college and I thought I would be in college for 4 years. 11 years later, I finally graduated. I had 2 masters and a PhD at that point in time, and I had signed a contract to go overseas and teach for the University of Maryland in Asian countries, in Korea, the Philippines, and Japan. So I graduated in May, and my contract sent me overseas in the middle of August, and I needed a job for a short period of time. The girl I was dating was this incredibly beautiful woman, and where she worked was the Department of Education for New York City. And because she was that attractive, many people knew her in the building. She was in central administration. And she said, you know what, if you want, I can get you a job as a custodian. I'll go talk to the head superintendent of custodialism, or whatever it's called, for the city of New York. I said, great. So guy calls me up and he says, report to this guy. And you start at $10 an hour, you end at $10 an hour. Start any day you want, leave any day you want, I don't care. So my first job after receiving my doctorate was to be a custodian for the New York City School Department. Now, the custodial system in New York City is run by the mafia. And I don't know if any of you know that or not, but it is. And when I got there, it was the first week that they were paying their employees by check. Now, the way it worked was this way. There were head custodians throughout New York City. There are thousands of schools in New York City. The person I worked for, there were 4 schools that he was in charge of in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. And each school had a staff. And at the beginning of the school year, at the beginning of the fiscal year, the Department of Education would deposit with him his entire year budget. And he would put it in his personal bank account. Don't ask me why, but that's how it worked. On Fridays, he would come down with a roll of bills and go, all right, here's how much you get paid. And he'd roll out cash. We were all employees for the city of New York, and yet we were being paid in cash by a big roll of bills from this Italian guy. Well, it turned out that the week before I started, he paid everybody on the staff, and somebody was behind him, and nobody realized it, with a gun. And he walked in and he held up every guy with his full week's pay in his pocket. So they decided from then on they would not pay people in cash. they would pay them by check. So when I got my first check, it was a check from, Chase Manhattan Bank, Frank and Maria Lucchese, or whatever their last name was, and it was their personal checking account, and his wife's name was on it. And I'm going, shouldn't I get like a real check, with things? And he says, no, all that stuff is taken care of, your taxes are all taken up, but this is how much you get. And I'm thinking, this is insanity. But it's the way things worked in New York. Now, I worked there for the 2.5 months. I made some money, which is what I wanted. I could go off to Asia. And I come back the next year. And maybe another year goes by, and the big shot, the big gun, who was the head of all custodians for the city of New York, remember the one who my girlfriend approached and said, can you help out my boyfriend? He's walking his dog in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, early in the morning. For some reason, someone didn't like him and walked up behind him and popped him in the back of the head with 2 shots of a .45. Again, I'm thinking there was probably a disagreement among someone in the family, so to speak. I have no idea the point of this whole story, but I thought I would just draw you in and let you kind of understand a little bit about my life and my flirtation with mafia figures, so to speak. That's not my only experience with them. I don't know if any of you remember the story I gave about Carl the Hitman teaching you how to kill people in public and get away with it, but that's a whole nother story that we won't get into today. I'm just happy to say that this is the end of my demonstration on how to say almost anything off the top of your head, which is actually true, but thank you very much, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Excellent job, excellent job.